Now I'm putting together a sprinkler. This is going to be used on our sprinkler continuous hoseway that we're running along the road here. This is important because we want to protect values at risk such as campgrounds, signs, buildings in the area. And so that way it can prevent the fire from getting super intense and potentially crossing the road um, and destroying structures that we want to protect.
Hello all, Jake Cagle, Incident Commander for California Interagency Management Team 4. So you got a good update of what we do for the sprinkler kits, and here's just another example of them actually putting in the sprinkler head. They reinforce it in there with the stake and then put the sprinkler head on top of it. Very effective tool when we're doing any kind of structure protection. It allows us to kind of back out of the area, put a lot of moisture in the area, and then we can adjust those sprinklers as needed, turn them off if we're not going to see any fire behavior, or turn them back on. So a very effective tool where we can get in, put it in, and back out, and then go work somewhere else and prioritize somewhere else. Okay, so here's an example of the sprinklers that are set. You have the main, what we would call a trunk line. That's what feeds the water to all the sprinklers. And we're going to show you a little bit more about what the pumps look like and everything. But, we're going to get into explaining, this is part of what we've talked about in the past, is when you hear us talk about point protection, this is part of that. We're just providing some form of protection into those structures or areas that have structures. So here's an example, filling up the pump. These pumps, when they are running, are good for about 4 hours. So in this area, we have over 70 pumps. So that's just one big task alone for firefighters, is ensuring that the pumps are full of fuel. When we do put these down, there's actually a retainer, so we ensure that fuel's not getting into the ecosystem at all. So it's a very systematic way of setting up these pumps to ensure that we're protecting the environment. And here's an example in the creek. You can see that white underneath right next to the creek. That's just an example of that environmental protection there, so we don't get it into the water system at all. So when I talk about point protection, this is just it. This is a campground, and you can see the structure wrap, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but the silver building, that has structure wrap around it. It's just another tool we use. And here's another example of that. Structure wrap is basically, it's a fiberglass filament with a foil exterior, and it prevents anything from getting in to that building. Very effective tool. And here's another example of how they install it. So making sure that there's no holes anywhere, and it's usually put on by staples. So they just continue to wrap the structure. The ceiling is metal, so no need to actually hit the metal, but they're going to hit the eaves and then wrap it all the way down. Typically, when we are doing point protection, resources are still going to be there, but if we're going to see extreme fire behavior, we turn on the sprinklers and resources go back out of that area. Now, this is what we do for historic buildings and campgrounds. We wouldn't necessarily do this if we were point protecting a community. If we were point protecting a community, that's one of our values at risk. So we're going to actually have resources in there ensuring that it's not getting into the house and doing structure protection. This is an example of our resources actually firing on the ground. They have drip torches in their hand. It's a mixture of diesel and gasoline, and just utilize a road system to clean it up. Basically, in a sense, fighting fire with fire. Here's another example. They're actually doing a firing operation up here. You can't see the resources, but they're bringing it down towards there's actually a road before it hits the lake there. But a very effective tool when you have favorable winds. So typically when we burn, we ensure that we have winds to our back. There's two different levels. We have strategic firing, which is a large scale, we just call it firing. And then we have burnout, and that's just a small area level of burning. It's a tactical, real quick, because we're right next to the edge, so it's not as coordinated, doesn't need to be communicated through everybody. It's just a tactic. But a large scale burn, there's a lot of coordination that needs to go on. A lot of we actually have to develop a plan and make sure that everything is correct before we implement, because we don't want to do anything wrong. So we want to make sure that everything is lined up. We have favorable weather, we have favorable winds at our back, and it's actually doing good for the resource, the fuel management. We're not getting what we call scorch heights or any kind of tree mortality. So you can see here, this is a very low intensity firing operation, and it's very good for the landscape. Thank you.